Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to our inaugural event on advances in clinical trials in partnership with the NIHR and supported by our expert speakers today. My name is Neelam Patel, Chief Exec of MedCity, an organisation founded in 2014 to boost innovation for the growth of our economy and the health of our communities. We work across a diverse stakeholder group from academia and industry through to local authorities and the healthcare system. It's very exciting to have this first event to a largely NHS R&D audience. And so why is this event so important to us? Well, for several reasons. Research and clinical trials are fundamental to innovation development. And we've seen over the past few months so much is possible in speeding up the trial process, and much work is being done to maintain that speed to get treatments to patients faster. In our role at MedCity, we feel that an important part of scaling innovation and speeding up processes is through shared learning and knowledge exchange. And this event aims to do just that. So today, our focus is going to be on innovative ways in which a huge burden of manual data entry can be reduced by technology that bridges the hospital's electronic patient record and electronic data capture systems. This symposium will feature perspectives from various organisations, the Trust, the NHR, the company, and through various case studies. And we're really privileged also to have members of the European Institute of Health Record and Research. So before we kick off, just some housekeeping. Please keep your camera and microphone off unless you're speaking, and this event is being recorded. And please do use the chat function for your questions, as we will be having a Q&A session at the end. So with that, I would like to very much take pleasure in introducing John Nother from the NIHR, Chief Digital Officer at the NIHR, to talk to you and give you an overview of the digital strategy for research. John, over to you.
Thank you, Neelam, and good afternoon, everybody. Let me just share my slides. 1 second. Everybody see that? Someone give me a yes?
Yes. Yes.
Yep, perfect. Okay, so good afternoon. So I'm just going to give you an overview of the work we've been doing at the NIHR around our digital strategy. So I'm John Nother, I'm the Chief Digital Officer. So just an introduction, the NIHR, so we're funded by the Department of Health and Social Care and established in 2006, and we work very much in a number of different partnerships across the NHS, universities and local government, etc. And I joined the organisation in March 2020. I'm not from this sector, so my role was a new role appointed to look at the way in which we digitally transform all of our ways of working and the way in which we engage out externally. So I sit on the Centre's Executive Board and the NIHR Strategy Board. So what we've really embedded and what we've followed over the last number of months is really how do we set out a digital transformation that's extremely collaborative, and we've been working with all of our coordinating centres, our partners, the devolved administrations, various leaders from within the Department of Health and Social Care. But what we've brought and what I'm really passionate about is we look at a transformation with a customer focus, so very much around user-centred design and how we transform the way the NIHR works, looking at outcomes that's going to make it easier for our customers. So what we did back end of last year, we set out what you can see in the blue boxes, which basically is a pathway through our organisation. And we gathered over 250 people to take part in 2 workshops for each of these boxes. And we had people representing our colleagues, we had researchers, we had members of the public, we had devolved administrations and so on. And really the first workshop focused very much about what are the barriers that exist in each part of this pathway. And we talked about that to really understand where the complexities are in the organisation. And then we started to think about, from a digital perspective in the second workshop, what is it that we can do to start to address these? So some of the key themes that really came out I'd like to share with you, because they're foundational in the work that we've kicked off. So interoperability, we got a lot of feedback that the actual interoperability between systems in the way that data is re-entered is extremely complex. as you go through this process, there's a lack of awareness often where to go for the different stages of this journey, and there's lots of manual duplication. The second big point that really came through more from an external perspective was really the awareness of who the NIHR is and of research in general. So how can we sort of build more trust with the public around what research is? And how can we look at digital tools to really deliver research that fits around people's lifestyle? Also, how can we use research tools to really help us recruit a more diverse participant cohort to support our researchers in delivering research faster? Another area very much was around the tracking of research as it goes through its many years of life and through the different systems, and how can we create that golden thread so that we can really look at the value and the decisions that we made and help disseminate that and learn from it to drive better research. And then finally, collaboration was a really key theme around the digital tools to really enable our colleagues and how we can help them, whether that's career development, whether that's engagement, accessing. So from this, what we really identified, we're trying to pull out who are our key personas that we need to have front of mind when defining our transformation. So the public is a key lens for us, and the real goal is how do we make it easier for them to engage into research, really widen out our footprint and awareness to build that trust, engagement with various parts of the NIHR, with the NHS and various partners, and also how can we really tailor research to fit around lifestyle and make it an enjoyable experience for people so that we create that ongoing relationship. The second lens for us then has been very much around our researchers and what capabilities can we build to help automate and integrate key systems and the way in which data flows, aligning of data standards so that we know we're looking at the same data in different systems to really help us drive better value and help collaborate and drive insight for our colleagues and stakeholders. And then the third lens is very much around our colleagues and partners. So how can we take away some of the inefficiencies that by adopting digital will allow our colleagues and partners to do their role more easily, actually speed things up and make it a lot more pacey in the delivery of change. And we've invested very heavily in the way in which we drive digital data and technology across our organization, and really thinking about our carbon footprint and what we can do to make massive changes in the sustainability. So what we've done, we've set out 6 objectives, and we were fortunate to secure £10 million of investment from the spending review for our first year. So these objectives really face back into those barriers that were identified in the grey boxes I talked through. And the idea is, in this first year, we've kicked off a number of initiatives against some of these objectives. And the idea is, year on year now, as we secure more funding, we'll continue to deliver transformational change. So our number one objective is really thinking about the interoperability and how do we accelerate that end-to-end research. So this year we've started to invest in a platform that allows us to integrate the way data flows through some of our core systems. We're adopting some data standards so that we know we're looking at the same data as we go through all of these systems. And this is going to be a key foundational piece of work for us for the next few years, I believe. And what we'll also expand this out is to look at things like automation for back office to continue to define and deliver more transformation. Our second objective then is really trying to pick up on that barrier of external reach. And so this year we've been trying to look at what is the best way that we can develop the work that we were part of around the COVID vaccine registry, and how can we really make it easier to have that reach and trust out into the public, to be able to think about consent and be able to help researchers match participants into trials with much more sort of speed, which ultimately leads to supporting the above objective as well of delivering research faster. I believe this will be an area we really invest in next year as we home in on what the best vehicle is to take forward this objective. Our third objective then is really around improving engagement with research participants. So when people come into trials, how can we make it a really personable and enjoyable experience? So creating that relationship between the researcher and the participant. And we've started a piece of work we're calling digital trial engagement, which will allow the researcher to signpost and prepare the individual for their trials. We'll be able to communicate to them, pass on the outputs from the results of the trials through that experience. And under this objective in the future is where we'll also start to think about how we develop research to fit around lifestyle. Our fourth objective is picking up on this tracking of value. And so this is really looking at what key identifiers we can build into the studies, things like the Iris ID, things like ORCID ID, which will help us track that golden thread and be able to trace that research back and really look at the value that it delivers, but equally be able to disseminate that out more easily. Our fifth objective is going to be about driving data sharing, value and insight. And this year we've 2 initiatives looking under this objective. Our first one is we believe there are a number of researchers who don't have access to some of the bigger clinical trials units, and we want to help them with electronic data capture service, where we can provide a tool for them to be able to set up the data, deliver their trials, and we'll put a wraparound support help desk, helps them get their data validated, and really they can focus then on capturing that data and analysing it. But secondly, a key objective in this area for us this year is really our longer term data strategy and how we really drive better insight and value, how we think as a single entity of NIHR and not just in some of the coordinating centres that sit in their own business units. And then finally, to drive a lot of this, we're really looking deep into the organisation. So how do we drive better capabilities? How do we invest in people? How do we bring in new skill sets that will really allow us to think as a digital first organisation? We've established a digital data and technology board that has our business and technology leaders from across the coordinating centres. Also, it has our partners such as HRA and MHRA and DH sitting on that. And every quarter, we've invited the devolved administrations and HDR UK. So our goal here really is to look at the sector, deliver our digital footprint, but also then think about how we can collaborate and go forward together. What we're also doing under this area is just looking at our position around cyber and information governance, just to make sure we're doing everything that we possibly can to keep ourselves safe and also maximise the use of the data that we have. What I'd also say, what's happening here, not only we're delivering those initiatives, but we're actually going through a digital and cultural change. I'm actually in London talking to you today, and I'm normally in Yorkshire, and we've had a quarter feature commitment planning session for the last 2 days. And this is a real testament where we've got over 150 people working across all the work that I've just talked through. And we've adopted what we call an agile. So fortnightly sprints where the teams are committing to deliver new pieces of work. And we're having reviews after that 2 weeks to look at lessons learned. And we keep progressing in that manner. We've adopted tools that really help us work as a digital team with different geographies. So things like Jira, Slack and Confluence help us communicate easily, help us collaborate together on problems and really work together as a single team. And then finally for training, underpinning the organisation, thinking about what it is we can do to help it as it goes forward in terms of drop-in sessions on these tools, really thinking about the roles and the areas we need to invest in across the organisation for the future and what learning and development programmes need to be there to underpin our digital transformation. So it's a very exciting piece that we're driving forward. So in summary from me, really where we're going with all this, our first year will finish at the end of March when the first year's funding runs out. We've actually applied for more funding, hopefully from the spending review, and fingers crossed that will allow us to drive a number of years of continued change. We'll keep laser focus on the lenses of public, researchers, colleagues and partners with a real view on the outcomes that we want to deliver there that's going to make it easier and better for these personas. And then I think the other things that I'm really keen to drive is a wider partnership and collaboration. So as the ripples of the pond go further out, we need to build the connections and align data and align processes to really think about how we leapfrog and deliver sort of more change. And the final bit for me is really having a real cognizant eye towards the UK's agenda and some of the government ambitions around health and research. So things like the Bay strategy and the life science strategy, and really looking at what we are doing to drive our part there. So that's it from me. Hopefully that gives you an insight in terms of where we've come and where we're going. And I'll hopefully talk to you later on in the Q&A. So thank you.
John, thank you for that. And it is really exciting, the work that you've started. And I already have a few questions in my mind to ask you in terms of time frame and what to expect and how you know, people on the ground like me can expect that change to fold, you know, down to our level. So, but we'll save those for later on. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Neelam.
So next on the agenda, I'm really excited to introduce you, Dr. Matt Sundgren. And Matt, I have to get my piece of paper out because he has quite a large job title, Director of Health Data Science and Artificial Intelligence at AZ. And I think that's just one of the many hats you wear, Matt, because today you're talking to us about the EHR to EDC consortium and the work that you've been involved in there. So tell us more.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm going to be thankful for my EHR to EDC colleague Nadir Ammour, because I'm going to share some of his slides. I'm going to take you through what we have been doing in this space and over the next 9 minutes. So we have been working in this space for quite some time. So it's actually started off in 2011 with a large IMI Innovative Medicines Initiative project, which was called Electronic Health Records for Clinical Research. And it was run between 2011 to 2016, where we actually were very bold to find, research and develop scalable solutions around 3 large use cases where we could use EHR data in a federated way. In other words, that data stays in fully control of the hospitals, but we could use that scalable way of improving study design and feasibility. That was the first one. Second one that we were able to pressure test was the recruitment. And then we were bold enough to have a third one, which was EHR to EDC, or trial execution, where we could actually made the first requirement specification list. What would it like if we had mature hospital sites who could actually had the ability to capture data directly from electronic health records directly into our study database? So what we have, the situation now is that sort of in some of the cases, we have more than 50% of data that is re-entered, which causes not only a large delay in study execution, but also invoke errors. So it is quite a complicated aspect that we were not able to pressure test during the EHR for CR project, but we were able to take it further in collaboration with Janssen and Sanofi and UCB, which was the EHR to EDC project, which was funded by EIT Health. We worked together with 4 other hospitals in Europe to actually being able to take this EHR to EDC solution one step further. What I would like to, before I going into that project, I would like to make you aware about that this is a real ability to transform the way we are doing clinical trials with large benefits for everyone included. Next slide. So what you see here, the EHR to EDC project was a collaborative project, which was including hospitals in Europe, together with 4 pharma sponsors, where we actually wanted to take a next step on how we could be able to take this technology further. This is not only about having the right technology vendor, but it's also a number of things that you will see here as key learnings. What we are aiming at, and still are, is that structured data is what we think is the real value here. The structured data, that is that terminology data that goes across semantic interoperability in different countries. So that are the different ICD-10 codes, et cetera, that is stored in the EHRs. So we were able to trying to understand what are the most prominent data elements that we could write benefits of. So that's sort of the source mapping and also the data workflow how that could be lined up. And also the training and also the different aspect that is so important here. It's not only about technology, it is about understanding the processes, training, the maturity of sites that could be part of this technology is also very important. The last year of the EHR to EDC project was actually lining up to a study that we did. We tested 6 clinical trials that was going on in the different participating hospitals. And we set up sort of a minimum limit that could we secure, could we pressure test with these 4 sites using a technology vendor at the time, which had the opportunity to tap into these EHR systems at the 4 sites. And that was called the transfer study. And we were able to demonstrate that this concept can be done. So we were able to go beyond the limit of capturing 15% of the most important low-hanging fruits. In this case, we were aiming towards cardiovascular trials, but also oncology trials. And I would like to say that the oncology trials is specifically important here to write benefits, especially when it comes to the local lab. Local lab data volumes are very significant and actually represent quite a large amount of time and data intensive. So this ability to use EHR to EDC solutions for oncology, where it comes to data-rich elements like local lab, but also concomitant medication, vital signs, was actually presented in the transfer study. So we had, with good results. So the transfer study was actually a proof of concept how to do this, and we would like to move on. The EHR to EDC 2020 activities also demonstrate that we need to understand which are the vendors who could actually comply to the requirements that we also developed within the projects. What are the data flows that is necessary? And other kind of technical requirements. So as part of the 2020 activities, as an extension of the EHR to EDC consortium, we were able to identify on a global basis the key vendors in this area, because what is important here is also that we have a number of vendors who we could use from an industry perspective. The other thing that we also worked with was to understand the EHR to EDC readiness within hospital sites, which are equally important. If we don't have a mature and important network of hospitals that not only are interested, but also capable to use this technology, we will not be successful. As you will hear later in today's call, the European Institute for Innovation Through Health Data is also an important non-for-profit governance functions who could be able to provide the accreditation mechanism for vendors as well as for hospitals. So the other learning that we have been able to do is that for those who think that we can launch a fully fledged EHR to EDC solutions for a trial where we capture everything at every site may be disappointed, but we think that the way forward is a stepwise approach where we could find the right technology platforms. We have the hospitals and we take studies forward in a stepwise approach. In other words, we will be able to capture, perhaps for a trial in the next coming years, a number of sites, but perhaps 10%, 20% of the sites in the trial, and capturing the most promising data elements and move forward in that pace. And we think that that is also the most successful way to move forward. The consortium has also been influential in interacting with both EMA and FDA in 2020 and 2021 to see to that, are we on the right track? Can this, and we have a full support, the aspect and the feedback coming from an EHR to EDC perspective from regulatory authorities has also been very promising and encouraging. So with that, I hand over to you, Neelam.
Thank you, Matt. That's really interesting what you say, particularly in terms of the need for interest and capability for sites to actively engage and deliver the impact. And so I think the next presentation from Dr. Keong Wong and Richard Yeatman, just demonstrating how this can work in practice, I think will be really interesting. So can I hand over to the both of you just to share with us your experience in terms of deployment of this technology on an oncology study at UCLH?
Yeah, of course you can, Neelam. Thank you very much for having us. Let me just share my screen. If you guys can let me know if that's coming through. Is that working okay?
Yep, I can see it, Richard.
Excellent. Okay, let me make that bigger. Right, so it's exciting, first off, that there are so many people here today to come and hear us witter on about the work that we've been doing. This project for Ignite Data started back before COVID-19 was a thing in 2019, when we first put an application into Innovate UK for several £100,000 at that point in time, with this idea that maybe we could try and automate some data from electronic health records into electronic data capture systems in trials. Because at the time, from previous history of working in different hospitals, it just seemed a bit silly that so many people still had to enter so much data. And when you look into that more and you look at the consequence of that manual data entry in terms of source data verification and all those other monitoring queries that might come up around it, not to mention the sheer amount of time that gets consumed by staff at hospitals, it seemed like something that should be fixed. Not without a lot of challenge, which I think is what Matt's alluded to in his previous presentation on what the data landscape needs to look like. And I know Keong's going to be talking about that a lot more later. So this is our first public announcement really on this project and what we've been doing in collaboration with AstraZeneca and UCLH. And it's a privilege to be talking about it finally. So there's two of us doing this presentation. I'm going to be doing the first half. I'm Richard Yeatman. I'm the Chief Technical Officer at Ignite Data. Keong, I don't know if you want to jump in and quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Keong. I'm a consultant hematologist and the Chief Research Information Officer at UCLH.
Awesome. Thanks, Keong. So if I jump forward a little bit here, what we're here to tell you today, as I've already mentioned, this is kind of our first public announcement. We're going to have a press release coming out as well about some of the exciting stuff that we've been doing imminently. So University College London Hospitals, AstraZeneca, Ignite Data have been collaborating to test this thing, this novel smart on fire based technology. Keong will talk, and I will talk more about what smart on fire is as we go through this presentation, to automate this data collection, to solve the pain that I was alluding to at the start of the presentation. I don't know why all the numbers have changed to a 1 when I downloaded it from Google Sheets, but there you go. So we're going to be talking about the fact that we've got a successful integration at UCLH. It's gone live in their non-production system. Even today, we've been live testing different data coming out of their Epic system there. It's all super exciting, going directly into AstraZeneca's RAVE system. Archer is one of the first EHR to EDC data integration tools available in the world. There are a couple of others, but they're US centric. So we're certainly the first European and definitely heavily NHS focused tool to do this. We're going into a live oncology study later this year, but it's quite imminent now at this point with UCLH and AstraZeneca. We can't talk about specifics exactly about the study, but Keong's going to do his best to talk around what we're doing there. And also, Keong is going to be talking about why data standards are so important and what UCLH have been doing around this, and how, more importantly, other hospitals can do some of the work that they have been doing. So, if I talk a little, I've called this slide "What exactly is EHR to EDC?" But I suppose fundamentally this is more about what is Archer itself as a tool. So Archer is a cloud-based piece of software. It's sat inside Microsoft Azure in an NHS-approved sort of framework and data center. And what Archer does is it connects via APIs to different hospital electronic health record systems. So there's little icons in the presentation there. So that could be an Epic, an Allscripts, a Cerner, a there's lots of different ones it can connect to. And it connects via the internet to those publicly facing APIs using secure authentication to communicate with the data that's within those electronic health records and ask specific questions. Now, as far as the clinician, the data manager, the research nurse, whoever it may be in the hospital that's using the tool, it's actually an app that appears within the electronic health record. And this is where this HR75 Smart on Fire framework comes in. It's a bit like when you download a app on your phone from Google Play or the iStore or something like that. You download it, you install it into the electronic health record system, and that actually allows you to load that up inside of the electronic health record, and you can then go through a process. So it will automatically start sleuthing. We call it a virtual research assistant. It will look through that particular patient's record on your behalf. It will find the information that it's looking for based on the rules, the mapping rules engine, which is sat in the cloud inside that data center, interrogate that data and present that back to the clinician at the hospital. It's then the clinician's responsibility to review that data, check they are happy with it, validate it, and then finally agree to pass that across to the EDC system that's being used for the clinical trial. Now, that's important because it has to be what we'd like to call regulator ready. A clinician has to have looked at it, they have to have reviewed it before it finally goes through to that EDC system. The system itself, Archer, can then communicate with lots of different EDC. I've used that term a few times now, EDC systems. So that could be something like Medidata Rave would be a big one, or Oracle Inform. I'm sure there's a lot of research-orientated people on this call who recognize those different brand names. Now, Archer isn't there to solve all of the problems. There's obviously a lot of data that's going to be in a very unstructured format. So the idea is it's there to try and alleviate the problem with key data domains. And I think Matt's in his presentation alluded to some of those. It's things such as vital signs, labs, concomitant medications would be a major one, things like that. We do want to move on to unstructured data as well, but that's a very big project in its own right. Overarching all of this is obviously highly secure. It's been audited and reviewed and accredited by people such as Cerner and Epic themselves. And it's got a lot of other cool features inside it as well, such as ongoing monitoring, where we use cryptography to allow the system to check if there has been changes on any of the data in the electronic health record after it has been exported, which is obviously critical to prove that certain data items don't need to be source data verified after they've been taken out, which reduces monitoring queries and a lot of cost. So if I jump forwards, so how does this benefit the key stakeholders? I mean, there's two primary stakeholders and there's mutual benefits, but you could say there's CROs in there as well, sponsors / CROs. So broadly for the hospital, it's about a lot less manual data entry. See Keong nodding his head. It's you know, with the trial that we're looking at, Keong's going to be talking about, I think there's 1,000 lab data points that need to be entered in. And at UCLH, for example, you know, they're all coded. And with the tests that we've been doing recently, you know, that data can be grabbed quite easily via the tool and validated by a clinician prior to going through. Saves a huge amount of time. For the sponsor, it's about getting that high quality regulatory grade data faster which means that they can naturally reduce the costs, and the costs get reduced all round. So it's increasing speed, reducing cost, and improving accuracy. Right, now I'm going to bridge across to Keong, and hopefully he's going to sort of explain to everybody how we go from this world on the left-hand side where it's busy, 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 people looking over your shoulder, people coming to hospital sites and lots of painful manual data entry, to eventually a world where we don't have to do as much, I will say.
Thank you, Richard. Listening to you kind of explain this, I have to say it's such a great privilege to work with yourselves and AstraZeneca on this. For those of you who know me, I'm a big proponent of clinical data standards such as HL7 Fire and SNOMED. So having this ability to really kind of use it in a real life situation is just great. So I suppose a degree of drum roll is required here, what you're seeing on the screen. I think what you're seeing on screen is the first demonstration of EHR to EDC. So on the left-hand side, most of your screen is a screen capture from our electronic health record system. You can see this fake patient called Eden Mars. In the little browser window, you could see that Archer has grabbed the birth date and gender. And on the right-hand side, that's metadata rave, hosted by AstraZeneca, where you could see that the date of birth and the gender has been brought across, and all this is fully audited. Now, of course, birth date and gender is not particularly exciting, but imagine multiplying this by the thousands of data items covering medications and labs, and you can immediately see how powerful this piece of technology can be. Next slide, Richard. And I think, as Richard has alluded to, the thing that make this possible is something called HL7 Fire, and specifically a framework that works on HL7 Fire called Smart on Fire that allows applications such as Archer to plug into clinical systems like the electronic health record system. I think Smart on Fire came out about kind of 5 years ago. I have to say I was really excited about that, and I'm excited about this project because it allows a UCLH to work with a vendor specifically implementing this. So first thing to say, I guess, congratulations to Richard and the colleagues to be the first UK vendor to have your app available on the Epic App Orchard. So I suppose that's one big plus for kind of UK industries in this space. So the Elon Musk comment there clearly is by Richard, so I'm not quite sure of the link, but we'll try to feed it in a future presentations. Richard, you want to?
Yeah, no, for sure. It's because
give some context.
Yeah, no. It's a bit of a joke on the fact that hospital integration is hard, right? Smart on Fire, HL7 Fire is hard. It's not going to be solved overnight. When Elon Musk in the early noughties started Tesla and he built the Roadster and spent a small fortune on it, everybody said he was silly. It's never going to work. It's never going to happen. You're never going to get to there'll never be chargers everywhere. People will never adopt battery powered cars. People like ICE engines. It's not going to happen. Now in 2021, especially in the UK, after the last few weeks we've had with the fuel crisis where I couldn't put fuel in my car for 2 weeks, I think we know who's laughing. So you have to have some foresight about what will come. It's very easy for us all to say interoperability is hard. We'll never get there. The data's not great, but we have to go on that journey. And we have to say that we're going to get there. Otherwise, we won't get there.
Thanks, Richard. That's really helpful. And actually, it's on really nicely to the next slide. So I'm going to spend quite a lot of time on this slide because we talked a lot about, enabling technology such as HL7 Fire. But actually, as you could, which what I'm trying to illustrate on this slide is just a small piece of the puzzle to kind of enable this vision that we could pass structured, high-grade data, high-quality data from an EHR to an EDC. So as part of the EHR to EDC, I have learned a new term, and the new term is called e-source readiness. And I think this alludes to how do you say that a particular hospital that performs clinical research is e-source ready for an EHR to EDC solution. So some really kind of wise digital health pioneers have always told me that most digital projects are a large change management project, and you need the alignment of three key things: the people, the process, and the technology. So what I want to kind of illustrate in this slide is what we have done at UCLH in the last few years to create this alignment. So I'll start with what I would consider the easiest bit, which is the technology on the bottom right-hand side. Now, you clearly need an electronic health record system. Without an electronic health record system, you can't be ESOS ready. But your electronic health record system needs to be able to talk in a standardized way to third-party tools. So they need to have open, standardized APIs, in this case, FHIR. Important thing to stress is that FHIR itself is not the full answer, because FHIR gives a structure for how you might transfer the data from system A to system B, but FHIR doesn't define the language that you put within that structure. And that language is terminology. So this is using things like SNOMED, using things like LOINC and ICD-10. And you need to design your electronic health record system to ensure that it supports these kind of standards. And that is actually less of a technology problem, and it becomes a people problem. So why is it a people problem? Because we are very, very used to using our custom list of diagnosis, our custom list of lab tests, because it's something that we're familiar with. So shifting that culture to say, actually, we're now going to use a standardized dictionary that is created by someone else and by not us is actually a culture shift. And when you speak to vendors, it's actually unusual for organizations to demand the use of standards, because it's so much easier to just use what you have already created because people are used to the language. But when we implemented our electronic health record system, we were extremely keen that we used standardized information, because we realized that as a healthcare organization, you are not an island, and you're connected to all sorts of other healthcare providers, your GPs, your hospitals, to research organizations, to trials. So we want to bake in interoperability by using standards. So to do that is not easy. When you're trying to kind of trailblaze, you need the people with the skills to be able to do it. So we have a clinical data standards lead, and we are the first Epic using site in the world to implement MedCity for diagnosis recording natively within Epic. And this will be now the framework that will be used for all future Epic UK implementations. The end users need to buy into using structured data recording. And it's so much easier to show that buy-in when you could demonstrate potential automations like EHR to EDC. I have to say, when I approached the cancer clinical trials unit and other very experienced trialists at UCLH and introduced this concept to EHR to EDC, you really don't have to sell it very hard. Everyone could see the reams and reams of of data managers entering data from one computer system to another, and you could see real efficiencies. You need to work with a vendor that wants to support interoperability initiatives. And we are lucky to work with Epic, which has been great in enabling our connection, for example, to Archer. And as I say, this buy-in extends all the way up to our board level, and using standards is a strategic objective for UCLH, as is the digitization of our research activities. So at UCLH, the full delivery of clinical trials, the recording of information is all within Epic. And we pretty much removed the vast majority of paper processes from the research. And finally, the process, working in a digital way requires new training for people to adopt standardized workflow. Everyone needs to record adverse events in the same place, height, weight in the same place. And whenever we build new data entry items in our electronic health record system, we make sure that we don't duplicate. And all this needs to be driven by policy. So, ESOS readiness is not just about the tech, it's about lots of other things. And I would say that, all of it is synergistic. So I was excited to work with Archer and AstraZeneca, not only because it was better, to be innovative in clinical trial delivery, but also once I validated FHIR for this project, I validated FHIR. which means that I'm now open to using new apps and connecting to other organizations as well. Next slide, Richard. So now, does it all work at all? So as Richard alluded to, we are about to start an evaluation study of an oncology study that has actually already begun at UCLH. In green is the standard process. In pink is the kind of Archer process. So what we're going to do in this evaluation study, the trial will run exactly the same as how it would run, but we will also consent patients to allow us to do effectively parallel working using the Archer process. So the trial will run exactly as it is, and the trials team would not, the core trials team would not be kind of change their practice in any way whatsoever. Next slide. And the main objectives that we'll be looking at is on this slide. So we've got some primary, secondary, and exploratory objectives. I won't go through the exploratory, but the primary objective is what's the percentage of data points entered manually that can be processed and correctly transferred by Ignite Data AHR to EDC tech. And as you can see, we also have secondary objectives around measuring workload and describing any kind of new types of and frequencies of inconsistencies between the current process and the AHR to EDC process. Next slide. So a challenge was asked to me is how can you join this ESOS journey? So most of this has been covered in my previous slide, but you really, really need an operational champion, someone in your organization that really wants to do this. So that usually is the R&D department and the people delivering the trials. You also need support from the digital team, both your vendor and your local digital team, and put it through whichever governance process your organization has. I know this might seem really, really obvious, but without this, the project just can't proceed. At UCLH, we are really fortunate to have a role like mine called the Chief Research Information Officer, and I sit half in digital and half in R&D, and that allows me to bridge that process really well. It also helps greatly if your organization prioritizes data standardization. The benefits may not be immediately obvious, but within a few years, you would see that lots of opportunities start opening up to you when you start having to do, well, initiatives exactly like this. And I guess the other thing to ask yourselves is, does your R&D department have an IT lead to advocate for R&D requirements as part of your overall organizational strategy? I think this might be my last slide.
Great, thanks, Keong. That was great. I guess I'll just quickly finish up before I hand back over to Neelam to say, you know, obviously it goes without saying if there are hospitals on you know, representatives from different hospitals around the country on this call who want to find out more about this, want to get involved with this, or think they want to get involved but don't quite know if they're ready to be involved from a feasibility perspective yet, reach out to us. You know, Keong's certainly always keen to share his learnings, and I know I am as well. And AstraZeneca, Sanofi, and other people on this call, different sponsors in the industry, you know, the time is now. There's a lot of enthusiasm for the industry to try and get this out there, and we want to try and get this type of technology, not necessarily ours, there will probably be others, but we want to get this type of technology out into hospitals and get it working effectively in the right way. Thanks, Neelam.
Thank you, Richard and Keong, for sharing your experience, and I really like the ESOS readiness term. I think that's great. So I liked also the picture you shared, Richard, from now till what it could look like, and that sort of brings me on to the next talk, our last talk before we go into the Q&A. So please do put your questions into the chat, and I'm really excited. Hopefully it will start. Great. So I'd like to introduce to Professor Dipak Kalra, who's president of the European Institute for Innovation through Health Data, as well as Dr. Nadir, the global lead for clinical innovation partnerships at Sanofi, to really talk about the art of the possible looking ahead. And we've been talking about the future in the last talk. So Nadir and Dipak, how long away is that future? Tell us.
Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us. This is the hardest part, right? How this will look like. So let me share some of the material that we developed for that, and it is all driven by this EHR2EDC project that we've managed. Can you see my slide correctly?
Nadir, you're on a 2-slide display,
Oh,
but
so let me change my settings then, because I think that I have I stop sharing and I will go here, and then you let me know if that's better. Is that better?
No change, I'm afraid.
not quite, but I'm sure it'll be fine.
So what is happening here? I need to
presenter, yeah.
That's probably going to be. So how is it now? Can you see just one slide, or can you see it?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, if you want to put it on presentation mode, hopefully it will go on one slide now.
Yeah. For some reason, it doesn't want to resume slideshow.
Okay. It looks fine if you want to continue.
Okay, sorry for that glitches, but so let's get moving. So let me share with you these numbers, because I think that's where the story started essentially. I'm sharing with you 2 examples. One, it's a real oncology trial. We've done some calculations and we found out that is a completed study, and we've collected close to 9 million data points entered manually. We factor that into a number of hours. We use conservative numbers, and we come up with 142,000 hours of manual data entry. That if you make the math and use like 30 euro per hour, which is a low rate, you ended up with essentially spending more than 4 million euro in just data entry. This is not monitoring, this is not SDV, this is not querying. That's for an oncology trials. And if you look at that from an hemophilia study, it was close to 11 million euro, and then you have much higher numbers there. And that money doesn't go back into other research programs. This is it is resources that is being essentially spent on data entry, and is not necessarily going to be adding value for a future research program. And that's really one of the from a data entry perspective, one of the shocking number that we can find when we look at those calculations. Now, trying to do that, and just wanted to highlight the fact that trying to use EHR as e-source has been a work that has been undertaken for probably 2 decades now, and a number of publications have been done on that, but none of them have been designed to be able to use it across multiple hospitals simultaneously into a global study and international study, which was what Matt has mentioned earlier, which was exactly what we have achieved with the transfer study and the EHR2EDC that was conducted in Europe. It was essentially in Spain, France, Italy, and Germany. If we go into that, I think the idea was really to partner and to create that consortium. And I think my keyword here is it does require collaboration. It does requires that clinical research units, medical informatics, companies like Ignite, pharma companies comes together into a pre-competitive space and work collectively to enable that not only to happen, but also to scale up, because that's really what the reality would end up. You've seen the summary. I mean, Matt has been talking to that. We know that could work, and I think the team that will be working with Ignite will also demonstrate that this will work. I have no doubt that will be successful. Proof of concept with the 2 hospitals in the UK. I think the question really would be, how do we then take it to scale? How do we reproduce that into real studies? And what does it take to make it work and become mainstream essentially in the future? Oncology is definitely a right place to start. Why? If you look at the number of trials that are running right now, and I've done that from trial.gov, by far, oncology represents the highest number of trials that is running and starting, followed up by immunoinflammation trials. And in essentially, this is driven by science and being driven by the number of molecules and programs that are running in those areas. But also, oncology centers are probably the ones that are much more mature to, fill the last mile and become e-source ready, I would say. And finally, there is in oncology a large volume of local laboratory data, as highlighted by Matt. This is one of the drivers for achieving some value at scale. So, with that respect, we also need to acknowledge that this mechanisms of data collection should not be reserved to industry-sponsored trials, but is also a technology that should be utilized for public-funded trials, for academic trials, for all type of research that is being conducted that utilize data in the generation of evidences. Now, a couple of also observations that we need to take into consideration as we look forwards. We have also looked at, is it possible to collect all data through EHR? And the answer is no. Not all data expected to be collected in interventional studies are expected to be found into EHR, but also that some of the data that are expected to be collected are not easy to be collected. We are focusing on structured data right now, but we do need also to start thinking about how do we access unstructured data? How do we access complex data that requires a physician assessment or a combinations of multiple observations that would end up into a score, like the RACE score in oncology. The good news, however, is a large proportion of data that is collected in industry-sponsored trials would come from those domains: demographics, vital sign, laboratory, concomitant medications, and physical examinations. So I think that's a very good news, because at the same time, we acknowledge that it is achievable and it is realistic, because majority of those data, maybe concomitant medication is an area where we do need to make some progress, but the other type of data do exist in structured formats into EHR system. The other aspect that we've learned, and it is something that came back when we were working with hospitals, if you are from a hospital side, you look at EHR, it's a vast and very variable domains of data. So what are the data that we should focus on? We can't really be boiling the ocean. Can we just focus on the data that are meaningful and valuable for research? So we developed this concept of high value data sets that are based on evaluations of type of data collected in research, but we define high value data sets as data that could be interoperable, that have that meet quality standards, that could be made available based on the FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and highly relevant to be used in research and service innovations. So that has led into two questions. So what are those data, and how do we know, and how do we identify the data of interest that we need to focus on? And you have already some answers, right? You've heard that local laboratory data, you heard about demographic and vital signs, and that's why we are focusing on those data. So the method was to take a number of protocols. In particular, in that case, it was in oncology. We looked at the data prevalence across studies, and we grouped them up into 4 categories: data that are easy and viable, like structured data that have some level of difficulty, not that much, maybe the BMI score, when you do need to have the weight and the age so that you can calculate that. And then there are some data that is viable but very difficult, as I mentioned it, and some that are not viable. And then from there, we can develop mapping libraries, and that has been developed and is viable actually. And the Dipak will speak about that. This is a resources that the IHD now will be able to kind of promote and make accessible to the hospitals who are interested. Finally, in order to move forwards, I think you've heard it already. Dr. Keong has mentioned it very strongly. We do need to work and promote clinical research centers that are capable of becoming e-source ready. But we also need to have e-source-ready clinical research teams. I mean, the technology doesn't work by its own. We need to have those trialists, we need to have study coordinators, we need to have the clinical trial units that are also, in quotes, e-source ready. We do need to have clinical vendors that are capable of scaling up this capability and with solutions that would work for both academic and industry sponsored trials. I think we need to avoid getting into situations where every clinical project team will come up with their own solutions and their own technology and their own mapping. I mean, we need to work as a collective ecosystem and environment and players to really promote highly reusable assets and open source in particular when it comes to mapping. And finally, there is the need also to consider how do we change the design of the studies and how do we conduct the studies when we are using EHR as e-source. Again, I mean, those are comments that have been made earlier, but absolutely important as we want to move forward with that. I will let Dipak continue because I'm not going to talk to that because we should not forget quality and training, and Dipak will take over me. Dipak?
Nadir, thank you very much indeed. That's great. Would you mind, since you can easily jump around the slides in this way, would you mind going to slide 14? I think that's probably a nicer slide to use for this purpose. Yes. Thanks very much indeed. So I head up a not-for-profit institute that is effectively acting as a kind of governance layer and enabling layer to the collaborations that you've heard about. Now, as you know, clinical trial data in a regulated space has very stringent data and trustworthy requirements. Regulators want absolute confidence that they can make evidence-based decisions in a trustworthy way. And so this concept of e-source ready is important. We've been looking after a few factors. One of them, of course, is data protection, making sure that when patients give consent for their data that is sitting in a clinical space to be reused in a research space, they absolutely know what's going to happen to that data and that only the data they agree to is communicated into the research environment. So data protection is an area that we've been working on, and we've got codes of practice and rules and other things that we deal with there. But perhaps the bigger challenge is really making sure that the data can be trusted as it travels from a hospital environment into a research environment. One of those areas is data quality. Now, we know that clinical practice in practice is variable in the quality of the data that it captures. The systems are variable in how easily they enable good quality data to be captured. So we are very keen as an institute, working with a number of partners, to develop an educational program for which we are now very fortunate in being in receipt of EIT Health Grant, to develop education and training for health professionals and research staff about data quality and how to improve it. Also about interoperability and how the interoperability landscape looks between care standards such as HL7 Fire and the research standards such as CDISC. We are in the process of starting to conduct electronic health record readiness assessments. That is, to what extent does an EHR system capture the metadata that's needed to demonstrate the provenance of the data sitting inside its repositories, such that there is complete auditability and traceability to the origin of the data when it's sitting in a research space, because regulators require that. But honestly, from my own background in electronic health record standards, clinical practice requires that too. So this is not a research only readiness assessment. It's really something that I think is good practice for care and research. So we will be conducting these surveys, and we would like to build up an inventory across Europe of the sites that are e-source ready, to use that phrase, that have, to use my phrase, regulatory grade data inside them, and are therefore well suited to the EHR to EDC scenario. That also means working closely with hospitals to help them to understand why this is important, how trust is assured when their data is transferred into this system environment, So we are also developing and conducting assessments of platforms such as Archer you've heard about. You've heard Richard giving you, I think, very honest promises about the data protection and information security inside his box. But actually our role is to offer to independently verify Richard's claims so that a hospital can be confident when it plugs in that its data is not going to incur a data protection information security risk. So those are examples of things we're supporting and helping. We are also very active in the ecosystem, helping to work alongside the standards bodies, such as the HL7 Vulcan project, which is bridging itself between care and research standards. We're very passionate about this topic. In summary, in terms of where we're going from here, the bottom line, I think, is that you've heard from people today who are at the cutting edge and are really ready to go. Indeed, UCLH is beyond ready to go, it's going. But there are plenty of hospitals that need help, that actually need to build up their data quality, their data richness, strengthen their EHR system, embed a culture of quality, a culture of research readiness inside the organization. And we want to try and help with that through a much more human and organizational, very much that lovely triangle you saw earlier. The people and the process parts are very important to us as well. I think the next slide is also a nice slide to close on. I think we're pretty much out of time. And to say that the future is absolutely data-driven. So where we think of an absolute watershed today between care delivery and clinical research in terms of clinical trials, I think as the data ecosystem strengthens, the learning health system and all of these different colored dots are coming of age, offering us brand new opportunities to work together. All of this is possible if we collaborate. And I really think this is also the beautiful time for multi-stakeholder collaboration. Some stakeholders have been speakers here. Other stakeholders are perhaps in the audience, and we would love to hear from you in the Q&A section that follows. I'll close there. I could have said a lot more, but I won't. I'll pause here so there's time for questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dipak and Nadir, for that talk, which is a good opportunity then to invite the audience for questions. I know that there are some questions. I can't see any in the chat right now, but I'm going to, at this point, hand over to Suki because I know she has received some questions. So Suki is a life science lead at the NIHR Clinical Research Network in the Northwest London, and Suki is very kindly moderating the next few minutes of Q&As. Over to you, Suki.
Thank you, Neelam. First of all, just want to say what an exciting lineup of talks we've heard this afternoon. We're really privileged, I think we all are, to hear the first public announcement by Ignite Data, AZ and UCLH. I am actually based in the NHS, part of NIHR, and I can certainly vouch for all the time our staff spend entering the same data into multiple systems. So Archer sounds like a wonderful tool. So let's go to some questions and comments. So first of all, to John. John, I think there was real interest in your comment about improving the visibility to the participant about the results from their trial that they've been involved in. I know as a trial participant myself, it was a fantastic experience, but actually I never heard from the study team about the results from that trial.
Yeah, I mean, we've had that feedback and even just simply saying thank you, you know, for giving the time up. So being able to say thank you to a participant, being able to share, you know, what the time that they give and what that result has resulted in. So this is a really important stepping stone for us in that relationship between researchers and participants, and hopefully we'll grow that sort of, you know, more longer lasting involvement, which is really what we're trying to do.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. So Matt, a question for you. There was interest to know how this is being implemented elsewhere in Europe.
So, as I said, as part of the EHR to EDC consortium, is that we did a survey to understand where the landscape is and where the vendors are. And the modus operandi is that we try to do competitive collaboration where it makes sense. So one of the key areas that we would like to collaborate on from an AstraZeneca point of view is, of course, to expand the eSource ready hospital network, which Nadir can also comment on. As far as we know, in Europe, this is the first attempt to take this as a next step beyond the transfer collaboration. Nadir, do you want to comment before handing over?
Well, what we can report is definitely the hospitals who have been taking part of this program are into the lined up. They are lined up to start, and I can tell you that the French APHP have already been moving forwards to look at how can they implement this capability for their academic trials internally. And there will be some further discussions as we're going to resume after this COVID-19 that has essentially took those resources away from working on this R&D project. But they are definitely, in Germany, in France, in Italy, in Spain, hospitals who have been knocking to our doors and look at where will you be moving into the scale-up phase, and we would like to be part of it. So high of appetite on moving forward with that. And as Mats has been mentioning, I think the thinking right now is, can we create a coalition of a large number of hospitals that would be willing to be part of what could become a champion program? Because we do need that. We do need, hospitals to own it, to want to implement it and start using it, not only for industry-sponsored trials, but also for academic trials.
Thanks, Nadir. And I can see in the chat already, there's a number of NHS organisations that sound very interested in being involved in a network like that. And while you both have the mic, there was a very good question that came through in the chat from Lauren about, is there a danger that if different sponsors procure different systems similar to Archer, will that lead to mass complication for the sites using multiple systems? And I think we know that happens already. So Mats, Nadir, would you be able to comment on that question?
Yeah, I can start off. I think that, as sort of alluding to what the role of what Dipak's Institute for Innovation through Health Data is, to provide the requirements framework. I think what is important is to have a network of vendors, a network of hospitals who can progress in this area with the right requirements. So in other words, I think what we have heard, Archer and Ignite data, and sort of the UCLH is using Epic. A hospital who's using another EHR system comply to the requirements needed. I think that's the way to go. I think it should be on a requirements based progress. Nadir?
Yeah, I think, I will simply supplement to what Matt has been mentioning. This is one of the question mark, is how do we stimulate the market in a way that we don't end up with the situation that you describe, where potentially one hospital would end up, having multiple systems because they work with multiple sponsors. One of the areas that have been identified as an area that needs to be protected is the mappings, is the translation that would happen, that would make the data from the hospitals digestible by, CDISC format in the case of industry-sponsored studies. But that's exactly where collaborations at the ecosystem level is required. and that what we also see the role of the IHD, as Maz mentioned it, to elicit what are those requirements that would prevent that situation to become chaotic and unmanageable, and why preserving the individual choices of the hospitals, but also enabling the market to grow. So it's not an easy answer, but one of the things I keep saying is, well, in my iPhone, I can use different apps, and I can send, photos or text or forward some, Twitters from different apps independently from one to the other. So there might be technical solutions that enable this interoperability to work.
And I would like to add also, as I said in my opening speech, structured data is gold here. If high quality structured data using the important terminology families will drive implementation, will drive value. It is in the future, perhaps a future for unstructured data, but I would like to see that reaping benefits for the next coming years is within structured data.
Brilliant. Thank you both very much for those responses. So we've got a question that's probably best directed to Dr. Wong from UCL, a question about, even if there is the ambition from the R&D department and the drive to implement a system like Archer, what about the wider trust infrastructure, like the trust data protection officers? How do you convince them that this is a good thing to do? And you perhaps share some of your experience at UCLH.
Thanks, Suki. So I think, yeah, it's not an easy answer, I suppose. I think one thing we've realized at UCLH is when we started our program in 2016 that we wanted to digitize the hospital. Digitization forces departments who may not traditionally talk to each other to come together, because in some ways your fate is now brought together by a computer system. I know it sounds quite dramatic, but it's really true. There's only one electronic health record system. There's not multiple files about the same patient kept in multiple different closets. So I would say that to be e-source ready, that is absolutely key. So if your hospitals don't currently have an EHR, and most hospitals are going that direction, it's absolutely key that the R&D department make themselves known and have a champion for them at board level that will champion the requirements of it. Because the basic fundamental building blocks to make a hospital e-source ready for research is actually the same fundamental building blocks for any hospital that has any ambition to be able to learn from their data and to be able to share that data with their healthcare partners. So unfortunately, it's not a simple answer, but on the IG and data protection, I think that's actually much easier to answer, because for EHR to EDC technology, no new data actually gets collected about the patient. It's just the pathway and the channel, instead of a human being, goes through a computer system. That computer system, in this case, Archer, needs to demonstrate to your IG department on how they don't actually store any information, but they're just a conduit. So I hope that answers that second part of the question.
Brilliant, thank you. And another question for you, actually. Do you know whether the Royal Colleges are on board with the work that's happening, given there is such a difference in the quality of recording of clinical data within EHR already?
Yeah, so I think most of the Royal Colleges slightly defer this responsibility around clinical data recording and clinical data standardization to the PRSB, the Professional Record Standards Body, which actually, I think it is still, I might be wrong, please don't fact check me on this, but I think it's still hosted by the Royal College of GPs and Royal College of Physicians, but that might have moved to the AOMRC now. But what's clear is that the drive for standardization and digitization is led not only by the Royal Colleges and PRSB, but definitely driven by NHSX themselves.
Brilliant, thank you. And now a question for Richard. So much of the research, of course, is moving into primary care. And a question about whether the Archer tool will be applicable to primary care sites.
Yep, it's a really good question. So our background as a company was working with primary care data. Originally, we used to do a lot of data mining on EMIS and System 1 records, things like that, to help recruit patients into clinical trials. So it's a space we understand well. When we started this project and we originally got the funding, the first proof of concept was built on EMIS. The issue that we came up against very quickly is the EMIS APIs at the time, I don't want to get too technical, but they spat out something called XML, and it was bespoke to that system. Although a lot of GPs use it, it was still bespoke, and we wanted to build something that was based on modern standards, this HL7 FHIR thing that we've spoken about a lot. So at the time, combined with the fact that a lot of the value was going to be on oncology, and we knew that, we had to transition away and build the initial product for a secondary care base, even if primary care electronic data is extremely well coded and has been structured for a very long time. That is changing, I think. GP Connect and things like that are bringing FHIR into primary care very quickly. A lot of that has been mandated by the NHS. So yes, it will come to primary care, we hope, very quickly. And then it's just about how do you effectively roll that out? Do you do it individually with each GP practice? Do you do it via a shared care record provider, such as a GraphNet or an Orion? Lots of things to think about there, but it's feasible.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. So it sounds like you've already done some work on it and more work to do in the future. And of course, there's multiple primary care systems, so there's System 1 as well as EMIS, so very exciting. And also, while the mic is on you, Richard, there is a question from Katrina about how other sponsors can support this work. Obviously, we've heard from AstraZeneca and Sanofi today, but how can other sponsors support what's going on?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it probably goes back to the other question as well about how multiple vendors doing what we're trying to do at hospital sites as well. I think maybe the easiest way to think about it is that probably hospitals aren't going to have a lot of systems like this. You could have us in the future, or maybe another one of our competitors, but you're not going to have lots and lots of them. And the onus is on us, really, I think, to create a marketplace via these tools. On the one side, we need to create site networks, because if we've got site networks, that brings value to the sponsors. It brings value to contract research organizations like the PPDs and the IQVIAs and these people. We're working with these CROs at the moment, and strategically for the major CROs, they're looking at this type of thing and they're saying, how do we enable sites so that we can sell more studies to sponsors that look like this? And then equally, how do sponsors want this technology? They're going to want this technology if you can say we've got a critical mass of sites that make your study viable to run in this way. So yeah, not direct answer, but yeah, that's kind of how we view it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. And questions for Dipak. I think all the trust was so reassured to hear your presentation and the governance and assurance that you give for the work that's going on. And there was a question from Francesca about how can trusts find out if they're EHR eSource ready?
Oh, well, we're developing a survey. Well, we have actually developed, we're just piloting. And then once we've done a bit of validation, we will have a survey. And what we're doing is we're introducing this as a 2-level survey. The first level, which is ready, is a self-assessment tool. So it's a bit of a questionnaire, because that's something that is effectively low cost, low effort to produce. And we're doing that quite soon. And we would like to build up that knowledge. Not only is that useful for a single site to discover where they sit in terms of the inventory of questions and their own answers to those, but it helps us when we're looking. I know that today the focus is the UK, but we're active across Europe to discover where are the are there some vulnerabilities and limitations that are cross-cutting and frequently occurring, in which case we may be able to organize workshops and other events to help bring players together to understand how they can overcome those limitations. The second level, which would be an on-site assessment, is likely to be a touch expensive. We're still developing it. We have the skills and team who can do it. But we've also got to really work out whether it's where people want us to. Do people want to put a large amount of effort into that? So we're not necessarily going to do that. However, I would like to respond to a question that came up a little bit earlier about data protection officers and anxieties. It has been a big issue for us to make quite sure in the EHR to EDC project that several hospitals across Europe, with their data protection officers and their ethics committees, were completely comfortable with the data flows that were being implemented. And so there are a number of measures, consent forms, transparency notices, that we have helped to fashion, which would need to be customized to each environment, but which help to give that assurance. There is a new processing that's introduced when you reuse routinely collected health data for research. That is new processing, even if it's pre-existing data. It's not automatically a legal processing without some additional governance, and usually that's consent. But that can be done. Patients are consenting to be in a trial anyway. You have to ask an additional question. As you enter the trial, can we suck some data out of your hospital EHR? And they can say yes or no to that. It's quite straightforward.
Brilliant, thanks, Dipak. And probably I'm going to make this the last question. I'm conscious of time, and Dipak, to you again, just to clarify, how will the trust receive the survey? Where will that come from? Because I'm sure they'll be very keen to know that.
Okay, well, I think the truth is, start with, you have to email me because we haven't released it yet, but it will be something that we will promote. We also can say that our colleagues, Mats and Nadir from AstraZeneca and Sanofi, are also helping us with cascading awareness of it through their site networks. And we're working with other pharma companies as well. So we will try and push information about it. But if you want to pull, drop me an email. And I'll pass you on to my colleague who's masterminding that.
Thank you, Dipak. And I'm sure the NIHR can support you in getting that survey to trust.
That would be wonderful, because I think rather than doing it in a piecemeal way, it would be great if we could do it in an orchestrated way with NIHR as a companion in doing it.
Yeah, brilliant. Happy to help. Over to you, Neelam. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suki, for that, and thank you to all our panelists today. So what started off as being our first event in showcasing and sharing knowledge and experience around the advances in clinical trials is ended up in some really interesting engagement and offers of collaboration, which is really fantastic to see. So thank you to everybody that stayed right to the end and listened and engaged. And I'm really pleased that we've got people from all over the country, from ambulance trusts right through to major foundation trusts. It's really fantastic to have that engagement. Just very lastly to say that if there are questions that we haven't answered here at this session, we will aim to answer them. We will have your contact details behind if you registered, so we'll get back to you. Hopefully you'll have contact details of all the panelists here today, so feel free to speak to them as well. And then finally, we're really keen to keep this engagement going in future symposiums. So if you do have any suggestions of other aspects of technology, innovation, clinical trials, please do ping them over to myself and Katrina, or Katrina at least, and we will delighted to continue this series on. So thank you very much again for your time, and have a good rest of the evening. Bye-bye.